Hey guys, this is Ian Tronto again. So today I'm going to be doing a book review on Out of Our Minds by Sir Ken Robinson. Quick quote from the book: Everyone has creative capacities, but they do not know what they are. So that'll make a little bit more sense once I get into it a little bit more on kind of what the book's about and what it's trying to get through to us. So before we get really in depth with the information, just to introduce the book and the authors. The author again is Sir Ken Robinson. Uh, Pretty qualified guy, has his PhD. He's worked in a lot of European organizations and universities. You can also find him on TED Talks. I actually watched one of them, and he's pretty interesting guy. Uh, Very outside the box thinker. Really cool guy to listen to. As far as the theme and the context of the story goes, the biggest thing, at least from what I got, is the education versus creativity today. So the book kind of goes into a little bit of history of both, what the drawbacks of our education are now and today, the challenges and changes required in current system of education to promote creativity, and therefore, so kind of what we need to do. The stance pretty much is there needs to be change, which again I'm going to go into my stance a little bit later in this review, but I'm fully on board with this stance as a teacher, as an educator, seeing it every day and seeing some of the teachers in the classroom on how they're teaching. Um, we're hindering the potential of our students for the future. So that's kind of what the stance is from what I got. As far as just the book in general, it's definitely not actually what I thought it was going to be. I didn't really read up on it too much. I thought it was going to be more about how to become more creative, and there is a little section on that as well. But for the majority of it is kind of outlining the problems we have in today's society, how we got there, the history of it, and whatnot. So I'd still give it a good 4 out of 5 stars. It was a good read, but definitely not what the title makes it sound like. So the chronological summary I have for the book, again, if you just want to look briefly at these on the screen where my clicker is, these are just kind of how the big chapters are broken down, and there's little sections, subsections broken down within them. So it starts off by talking about the themes, um, which one is the revolution, the second is survive and flourish by thinking differently about our own abilities. And the third is change within organizations, especially our education system. So then that gets broken down a little bit more. The revolution is something we're actually living in now, and it kind of points that out to us as readers. And it goes into a lot of the stats on the changes, such as shortened timelines for travel from 200 years ago to now, and communication from 200 years ago or 1,000 years ago to now, and even all the way to internet usage. How there This one wasn't really timeline based, but users. We had about 1 million users in 1991, and now there's about 2.5 billion users worldwide today. So everything is getting faster and quicker over time, and that as we're getting further into the future, it pretty much talks about how all that time is shrinking. So those numbers are multiplying at an unheard of rate. So the second part was problems with education. Um, this one again is pretty much how it sounds. It goes into a couple problems with education. There was a good little excerpt on this one, which I found pretty interesting. And it talks about a doctor that, I'm sorry, it's one of the author's friends that goes to a doctor on how he is drinking a lot during the day, and he's starting to have liver problems. And the doctor tells him to stop drinking so much beer and switch to spirits. And the patient asks, "Well, aren't I just going to get a different disease drinking that for my kidneys?" And the doctor says, "I'm not worried about your kidneys. I'm worried about your liver." So that's pretty much basing. That's pretty much like a example that they used, a funny little example that they used in the book to describe kind of how our education systems are today. How they're worried about just one thing at a time. They're not focused on the overall growth and overall health of these students. The next chapter was academic illusion. So this goes into kind of what is the definition of being smart, and it goes into a little bit more focuses like SATs and kind of how the schools shun the arts and the kinesthetic programs and really cater and give more to those English and math and science programs. The next section, Knowing Your Mind, is just about diversity in thinking, realizing who you are. And then there's a really cool part in that little chapter, which kind of goes through imagination versus creativity versus innovation, which I thought was kind of interesting. It kind of talks about what imagination is, and it's actually not really useful to us until we turn it into a creative idea, until we act on that imagination, and now it becomes creativity, and then creativity, once we act on it even more, becomes innovation, and that's how we kind of get new things in the world. So I really thought that part was interesting. The next chapter, You Are Not Alone, goes through power of ideas, cultures, the differences within cultures. There's a word they use in there called Weltanschauung, which is, I believe, German for worldviews, and it pretty much goes into the different worldviews that we all have. Um, and that's kind of how we grow as a whole unit instead of just one little place, right? The next chapter is Being Creative Leader. Kind of sounds was about how it sounds. It's about just roles on how to be a better leader in creativity. And then the last chapter is Learning to be Creative. Um, what are the core? It goes through the core purposes of education again, which were also in chapter 3, problems with education, which break down the personal purpose, the cultural purpose, and the economic purpose. And how we can be creative while still continuing to teach those 3 methods. So this part was also the call to action part of the book, which I was a little, I wouldn't say disappointed, but expecting a little bit more from. I would like a little bit more information on what we can do to get this going at a good rate. This has been an ongoing question. Um, and it hasn't changed how a lot of people have wanted to. So how can we get it to where it has to go, um, a little quicker? He did have some things in there, but I would just kind of was looking for a little bit more detail there. So my analysis of the whole book, and it's pretty much, I think I'm spot on this, is how there needs to be change. Why does there need to be change? Is because pretty much that's where our world is going. It talks about the change in times, change in cultures. It talks about how the last time school changed was around the Industrial Revolution, and that's why we're still teaching the way we are, and we haven't made any adjustments. Now, it also talked about how a bachelor's degree 30 years ago would get you pretty much any job you want, where now that's the bare minimum to get a lot of these jobs. But it also talks about how that's also the problem, that we're so focused on school and just getting the degree that we're not allowing our creative fluids to kind of to get out and express ourselves. So the biggest thing was change. Change, and most importantly, especially for me as an educator, is change in the educational setting. How can we make things more creative for students? How can we allow them to be more creative? Um, and how can we do this as a whole rather than just me in a classroom? How can we make all these classroom settings be more creative? Because the reality is the new generation of jobs are more computer based, they're more science based, they're a lot more creative than they were 40, 50 years ago. And that's why we're hearing it more now than ever that the school topics that our students are learning now don't really apply to the real world today as much. So how can we fix that? And then it talks about kind of how did we get here. So chapter 2 discusses just educational change, and it actually has a story of a son. And again, this goes back into the history of it, but his son getting a philosophy degree, his parents did not agree with it. His parents were professors. And then pretty much at the end of the story, he became an international auctioneer and got to travel the world and make a lot of money. So the point of that story was the parents having this one mindset, where this kid has a different mindset, and it actually working out. So we kind of have to change our mindsets in order to get there. And that's a big reason why we're at where we are today and why nothing has really been done. So the call to action part, he talked about, Sir Robinson talked about having a theory of change. Don't take, and my favorite part of that was he said, don't teach subjects, but teach students. So that part was really interesting to me. He talked about progressive teaching methods, wanting more from this. Um, he talked about a couple other things along those lines that kind of are pushing towards that. But again, needs to be a big picture. So I really agreed with all these things with him. Um, I thought, again, pretty easy to understand where he's going with it. I thought my biggest gripe with the book was it was a little tedious on certain parts, even though it is a shorter book. A lot of storytelling and a lot of historic data really getting in depth, where I think he could have gotten a little quicker through. But as far as the actual goal of getting the message across, I thought he did really well. So again, I really like, just to close it all out, I like the concept and the stance of the book. Um, Although it kind of gets lost with words, like I just said, the overall message is really worth it. I really think it would be worth a read to a lot of people. The last kind of bit that kind of stuck out to me before I let it go was a quick little story he said about an Australian farmer. Had a large tract of land inherited from his forefathers. Every year he would till the land and try to grow something on it, and nothing ever grew. So eventually he sold the land and the city took over. And when he went back several years, the land was a steel mill and they were making a lot of money pretty much. And what he found out was just another 8 feet under the ground, if he kept tilling, was um, a steel base. And if he would have just kept going, then he would have been that rich man himself. So the moral of the story was kind of to convey the irony that if only we can dig a little deeper, we may find is known to no one, but all the treasure we are looking for may be right there. And I thought that was really a cool little excerpt he kind of inserted in there. Again, a lot of those cool little things in the book, but I thought it went with his story pretty well on how we need to be more creative and how we need to allow creativity within our schools, and because that's just where the world is going. So I really liked those little stories and excerpts he put in. Anyways, I hope this was helpful. Again, I'd close by saying solid 4 out of 5, 4 out of 5 reading. Really, really, really relatable to our field of work and where we are today as a society. So I definitely give it a read, especially if these things interest you. Again, I wouldn't recommend it if you're just looking to be more creative, because that's what I thought initially, and that's not really what the book's about. It's about how we got there, what we can do, why, and it goes into a lot more depth than that. But it is a really good read, and it really kind of grows your knowledge on the topic. But anyways, if anyone has any questions about the book or would like to know a little bit more, you can contact me at iwtrantow at sbcglobal.net. Thank you guys and have a good day.